The girl standing on the auction platform had stopped crying 3 days ago because tears changed nothing in this world, and Arizona Territory in 1883 had little mercy for 17-year-old orphans with nowhere to go. Amelia Tucker stood with her shoulders pulled back despite everything, her dark blonde hair tied in a simple braid that hung down her back, her dress patched and faded from too many washings. The sun beat down mercilessly on Apache Junction's Main Street, and she could feel the stares of the crowd gathered below. They were not here to save her. They were here to buy her labor, to own the next 5 years of her life in exchange for paying off the debts her dead guardian had left behind. Mrs. Henshaw had taken Amelia in when she was 12, given her a roof and food in exchange for housework, and then died suddenly 6 months ago, leaving behind gambling debts that somehow became Amelia's burden. The territorial judge had decided this was the solution: auction off her labor contract. Someone would pay the debts, and she would work for them until it was settled. "Strong girl," the auctioneer called out, a portly man named Dickens who ran the general store and apparently also ran these degrading spectacles. "Can cook, clean, sew, and handle livestock. 5-year contract. Bidding starts at $200. Amelia kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon heat. She would not look at the faces below. She would not see their calculating expressions, would not watch them assess her worth like a horse or a plow. "200, someone called out, a woman's voice sharp and unpleasant. Mrs. Crawford, who ran the boarding house and was known for working her girls until they dropped. $250. A man this time. Amelia did not recognize the voice. $300. That was Jenkins, who owned the saloon. Amelia's stomach turned. She had heard stories about girls who worked in saloons, about what was expected of them beyond serving drinks. The bidding continued, climbing slowly. 400, 450, 500. Each number was another piece of her freedom being sold away. Another year of her youth promised to strangers who saw her as nothing more than a solution to their labor problems. $1,000. The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife, clear and firm and surprisingly young. The other bidders fell silent. Amelia's eyes dropped from the mountains despite herself, searching for the source. He stood at the back of the crowd, tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes so blue they were visible even from the platform. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a dark shirt, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard country. A cowboy, clearly, with a horse tied to the rail behind him. He could not have been more than 25, perhaps 26, with a face that was handsome in a rough, weathered way. But it was his expression that caught her attention. He was not looking at her the way the others had. There was no calculation in his eyes, no assessment of what she could do for him. Instead, there was something that looked almost like anger, a tight set to his jaw that suggested he was furious about the entire situation. $1,000, Dickens repeated, clearly delighted by this turn. "That's a serious bid, stranger. You got that kind of money." The cowboy walked forward through the crowd, which parted for him. When he reached the platform, he pulled a leather pouch from inside his vest and tossed it to the auctioneer. It landed with a heavy clink. "Count it." Dickens opened the pouch and his eyes went wide. He poured the contents onto a small table beside him. Gold coins glinted in the sunlight, along with folded bills. He counted carefully, his fingers moving quickly. The crowd had gone completely silent, watching. $1,045, Dickens announced finally. "More than enough to cover the debts and the fees." "Then we're done here," the cowboy said. His voice had a slight drawl, the kind that came from years spent under open skies rather than in towns. "Draw up the papers." "Now hold on," Dickens said, suddenly nervous. "There's a process. The contract needs to be written proper, witnessed, signed by both parties. Then do it." The cowboy's eyes had not left Amelia's face. "But do it fast. I don't like this any more than she does." Something in Amelia's chest loosened just slightly. She still did not know what kind of man he was, what he would expect from her, but at least he seemed to understand that this was wrong. That had to count for something. The papers were drawn up quickly. Dickens was efficient when motivated by gold. A 5-year labor contract, terms to be set by the purchaser, with the debt marked as paid in full. The cowboy signed his name in a surprisingly neat hand. Amelia leaned slightly to see what he wrote. Jackson Cole. Then Dickens thrust the papers at her with a pen. "Sign here, girl." Amelia took the pen. Her hand shook only slightly as she wrote her name. Amelia Rose Tucker. There. It was done. She belonged to Jackson Cole now, at least for the next 5 years. "Can she ride?" Jackson asked Dickens, though his eyes were still on Amelia. "I can ride," Amelia said before the auctioneer could answer. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I can handle horses." Jackson's mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Good. We've got a long way to go before sunset." He turned and walked back through the crowd without waiting to see if she would follow. Amelia stood frozen for just a moment, then gathered her skirts and climbed down from the platform. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced them to work. She had one small bag of belongings, which someone had left at the base of the platform. She scooped it up and hurried after Jackson Cole. He was untying his horse, a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a white star on its forehead. Beside it was another horse, a smaller chestnut mare already saddled. Jackson glanced at Amelia as she approached. "That one's yours," he said, nodding to the mare. "I bought her this morning. Figured you'd need a horse of your own." Amelia stopped, staring at him. "You bought me a horse?" "Before the auction, I bought a horse," Jackson said. "Wasn't sure yet who would be riding her." He tied his bag back onto his saddle, then turned to face her fully. "Listen, Amelia, that's your name, right?" She nodded. "Listen, Amelia, I know this whole situation is wrong. I know you didn't choose this, and I know you've got no reason to trust me, but I need you to understand something right now, before we go anywhere." He paused, and those blue eyes were entirely serious. "I didn't buy you. I bought your debt, which is different. You're not my slave, and you're not my servant. I've got a ranch about 3 hours north of here, up in the hills where there's actual grass and water. It's not big, but it's mine, and I've been trying to run it alone for 2 years since my brother died. I need help. Real help from someone who knows how to work. You'll work beside me, not under me. You understand the difference?" Amelia's throat felt tight. She had prepared herself for so many possibilities, but not this, not kindness, not respect. "I understand," she managed to say. "Good." Jackson untied the mare's reins and held them out to her. "Can you really ride? Or were you just saying that?" "I can ride." Amelia took the reins and mounted the mare in one smooth motion, settling into the saddle like she had been born there. She had grown up on a farm in Texas before her parents died, had spent more time on horseback than on foot for the first 12 years of her life. Jackson watched her with approval. "All right, then." He mounted his own horse with the same easy grace. "We'll stop at the general store for supplies, then head out. We need to be back to the ranch before dark. The trail's not safe after sunset." They rode through Apache Junction's dusty streets side by side. Amelia could feel people watching, could imagine what they were thinking. That poor girl, sold off like cattle. But she kept her head high and her eyes forward. This was not the worst thing that could have happened. In fact, as she glanced sideways at Jackson Cole's profile, strong and serious in the afternoon light, she thought maybe it was not a bad thing at all. The general store was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Jackson moved through it with purpose, selecting items and piling them on the counter. Flour, salt, coffee, sugar, dried beans, bacon wrapped in paper, ammunition for his rifle, a new rope. He paused in front of a shelf of women's items, then glanced back at Amelia. "You need anything? Clothes or supplies or anything like that?" Amelia looked down at her worn dress, then at the items on the shelf. There was a simple cotton dress there, pale blue and practical, and next to it a warm woolen shawl. Both things she needed desperately but would never have asked for. "I don't want to be an expense," she said quietly. Jackson's jaw tightened. "You're not an expense. You're a partner. If you need something, take it." The word partner echoed in her head. She reached out slowly and took the dress and the shawl, along with a new pair of work gloves. Jackson added them to the pile without comment, then paid with more of the gold coins that seemed to fill his pockets. Outside, he tied the supply bags to the horses efficiently. "You ever use a gun?" he asked as he worked. "I can shoot," Amelia said. "My father taught me before he died." Jackson pulled a rifle from his saddle boot, checked it, then held it out to her. "Keep this across your saddle. Like I said, the trail's not always safe. Bandits sometimes, or Apaches who aren't happy about settlers. I don't want trouble, but I want to be ready if it finds us." Amelia took the rifle. It was a good weight, well maintained. She checked it herself, noting the ammunition, then laid it across her saddle as he had instructed. Jackson watched her with those sharp blue eyes, and she had the feeling he was constantly assessing, learning who she was beyond what the auction block had shown him. They rode out of Apache Junction heading north, and the landscape changed gradually around them. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills covered in sage and scattered juniper. The air grew slightly cooler as they climbed in elevation. Jackson set a steady pace, not too fast but not dawdling either. He clearly knew where he was going. "How long have you had your ranch?" Amelia asked after they had ridden in silence for a while. 3 years, Jackson said. "My brother James and I came out from Missouri. We had some money saved and wanted to start fresh somewhere. We found good land up in the hills, near a creek that runs year-round. Built a house and a barn, started gathering cattle. It was hard work, but it was ours, you know." "What happened to your brother?" Amelia asked softly. Jackson's expression darkened. "Kicked by a horse, caught him in the head. He was gone before I could even get him down from the corral fence." He was quiet for a moment, staring at the trail ahead. "That was 2 years ago. I've been trying to manage everything alone since then, but it's too much for one person. The cattle need tending, the buildings need repairs, the garden needs planting. I let too much go this past year because I couldn't do it all." "So you came to town looking for help," Amelia said. "And you found an auction instead." "Found something that made me sick to my stomach," Jackson said bluntly. "I've seen a lot of ugly things in this territory, but selling a girl like livestock, that's lower than low. I had the money from selling my cattle this spring, all of it, and I figured it could go to buying more cattle, or it could go to making sure you didn't end up with someone who would hurt you." He glanced at her. "I chose you." Amelia felt something warm unfurl in her chest, dangerous and hopeful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You could have just let it happen. Most people would have." "I'm not most people," Jackson said, "and neither are you from what I can see. Anyone who can stand on that platform with their head up and their eyes fierce like you did has more strength than half the men I've known." They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The landscape grew more beautiful as they climbed higher into the hills. There were actual trees here, not just scrub brush, and the grass was thick and green in the valleys where water collected. Amelia could see why Jackson and his brother had chosen this place. It felt separate from the harsh desert below, like a different world entirely. As they crested a final ridge, Jackson pulled his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing down into the valley below. Amelia looked and felt her breath catch. The ranch was small but well situated in a natural bowl between hills. There was a house built from rough-hewn logs, sturdy and square with a covered porch. Beside it stood a barn, also log construction, and several smaller outbuildings. A creek ran sparkling along the eastern edge of the property, lined with cottonwood trees that were just beginning to leaf out in the spring warmth. Cattle grazed in the meadow beyond the barn, maybe 24 head that she could see. It was simple and rough, but it was also beautiful in a way that made her heart ache. "It's not much," Jackson said, and she could hear uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "The house is small, just 2 rooms. But it's solid and it keeps the weather out and there's a good stove for cooking." "It's wonderful," Amelia said honestly. "I've lived in a lot worse places than this." Jackson's expression relaxed slightly. "Come on then, let's get you settled before dark." They rode down into the valley as the sun painted everything gold and orange. Chickens scattered as they approached the house, and a dog came bounding out from somewhere behind the barn, barking wildly. It was a medium-sized mutt with shaggy brown fur and a tail that never stopped wagging. "That's Rufus," Jackson said as he dismounted. "He's friendly but loud. Rufus, quiet down. She's with me." Rufus immediately stopped barking and came over to sniff Amelia's boots as she dismounted. She reached down to pet him, and his tail wagged even harder. Jackson tied the horses to the porch rail and started unloading supplies. "I'll show you the house first, then we'll get the horses settled. You must be tired from all this." Tired was an understatement. Amelia felt like she had lived an entire lifetime in the past few hours. But she nodded and followed Jackson up onto the porch. The inside of the house was dim and cluttered in the way of a man living alone without much concern for tidiness. The main room held a large iron stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and tools, and a couple of comfortable-looking chairs near the fireplace. Everything was dusty and needed organizing, but it was clean enough and sturdy. "There's a bedroom through that door," Jackson said, pointing. "It was my brother's room. I've been sleeping in here by the fire mostly, so it's yours if you want it. Or if you'd rather, you can have my old room and I'll stay out here. Either way is fine." Amelia walked to the door and looked into the bedroom. It was small but private, with a real bed covered in quilts, a wooden chest, and a window that looked out toward the creek. It was more than she had dared hope for. "This is fine," she said. "More than fine, thank you." Jackson nodded. "All right then. You settle in and I'll take care of the horses and bring in your things. There's a pump out back for water if you want to wash up. We'll have dinner once I get everything squared away." He left her alone in the small bedroom, and Amelia sat down carefully on the edge of the bed. The quilts were handmade, beautiful work with intricate patterns. Someone had loved whoever these were made for. Jackson's mother, perhaps, or his brother's wife. She ran her hand over the fabric and felt tears prickling at her eyes for the first time since the auction. She had been so scared. So certain that her life was ending, that she would be trapped in some horrible situation with no escape. And instead, she was here, in this quiet valley, with a man who spoke to her with respect and gave her a room of her own and called her a partner. It felt too good to be true. And Amelia had learned early that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. She would have to be careful, would have to watch and wait and make sure this was real before she let herself believe in it. But for now, for tonight, She let herself sit on the soft bed and look out the window at the creek glittering in the last light of day. And she let herself hope. Dinner was simple but good. Jackson cooked bacon and beans on the stove while Amelia washed up at the pump outside, scrubbing away the dust and sweat of the day. When she came back inside, he had set the table with 2 plates and 2 cups of coffee. They sat across from each other in the lamplight, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of eating. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the place proper," Jackson said eventually. "The cattle need checking, and we've got fence repairs to do on the northern border. Some animal keeps knocking down posts. After that, if you're willing, I'd like to start working on the garden. We've got about a month before it's too hot for planting most things, and I'd like to get vegetables in the ground. We can live off supplies from town, but it's expensive and it's better to grow what we can." "I can do all of that," Amelia said. "I grew up on a farm. I know cattle and gardens and fence repair." Jackson looked at her across the table, his expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something personal?" Amelia tensed slightly but nodded. "What happened to your parents? How did you end up alone?" She had known this question would come eventually. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from it. "My parents had a farm in Texas near Austin. When I was 12, there was a fever that went through the area. Both of them got sick within days of each other. My mother died first, then my father 3 days later. I didn't have any other family, and the bank took the farm for debts. A woman named Mrs. Henshaw was passing through, and she offered to take me with her to Arizona Territory. She said she needed help with her boarding house and I could work for room and board." "But that's not what happened," Jackson said quietly. "She did have a boarding house in Tucson. And I did work for her, harder than I'd ever worked on the farm. But she also gambled. Bad. She owed money to people who didn't care how they got it back. When she died 6 months ago, suddenly those debts became mine. The judge said since I'd been living under her roof and eating her food, I was responsible for paying back what she owed. And since I didn't have money, they would auction off a labor contract." Amelia's voice was bitter. "Legal slavery, dressed up in fancy words." Jackson's hands had clenched into fists on the table. "That judge should be horsewhipped. You were a child when she took you in. You didn't agree to her debts." "I was also an orphan with no one to speak for me," Amelia said. "Those are the people who disappear in this world, who get used up and thrown away. I've known that since I was 12 years old." "Not anymore," Jackson said firmly. "You've got someone now, me. And I promise you, Amelia, I'll never let anyone hurt you or take advantage of you again. Not while I'm breathing." The intensity in his voice made her heart skip. She looked at him in the lamplight, at his young, serious face and his honest eyes, and she wanted so badly to believe him. But belief was dangerous. Trust was dangerous. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care what happens to me? You don't know me. I could be a terrible worker or a thief or a liar. You just spent every penny you had on a stranger." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "When my brother died, I thought about giving up, selling the ranch, going back to Missouri, starting over somewhere easier. But then I thought about why we came here in the first place. We wanted to build something that mattered, something that was ours. And part of that was being the kind of men who stood up when things were wrong." He looked up at her. "I saw you on that platform, and I saw how wrong it was, and I knew if I walked away I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I didn't walk away. I did the only thing I could do. And now you're here, and maybe that's how things were supposed to work out." Amelia felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I'll work hard for you," she said. "I'll earn what you paid and more, I promise." "I know you will," Jackson said. "I could see that just from watching you. But don't think of it as owing me. Think of it as building something together. That's what I need. A partner. Someone who cares about this place as much as I do." They finished dinner in more comfortable silence. Amelia washed the dishes while Jackson checked the doors and windows, a nightly routine to make sure everything was secure. Rufus settled down by the fireplace, already snoring softly. "I usually wake up before dawn," Jackson said as he banked the fire. "You don't have to get up that early if you don't want. I know today was hard." "I'll be up with you," Amelia said. "I want to learn the routines." Jackson smiled at her, a real smile this time that softened his whole face and made him look younger. "All right then. Good night, Amelia." "Good night, Jackson." She went into her room and closed the door softly. In the darkness, she changed into her old nightgown, then slipped between the quilts on the bed. They smelled like cedar and sunshine, and the mattress was stuffed with something soft, probably corn husks or wool. It was the most comfortable bed she had slept in for years. Through the door, she could hear Jackson moving around the main room, settling in for the night. She heard the creak of floorboards, the rustle of blankets, the final click of the lamp being turned down. Then silence, broken only by the distant call of a night bird and the whisper of wind through the trees outside her window. Amelia closed her eyes and felt exhaustion pulling at her, but her mind was still racing. So much had changed in one single day. This morning she had been standing on an auction block, terrified and alone. Tonight she was lying in a comfortable bed in a quiet valley, working for a man who seemed genuinely kind. She thought about Jackson's blue eyes and his serious voice when he said she would work beside him, not under him. She thought about how he had bought her a horse before he even knew if she could ride, how he had asked what she needed rather than telling her what she would get. Small things, maybe, but they spoke of character, of decency. She could not let herself fall for him, she thought drowsily as sleep finally began to claim her. That would be foolish. He was her employer, she was contracted to him for 5 years, and mixing feelings into that would only complicate everything. But as she drifted off, her last thought was of his smile in the lamplight, and how it had made something warm bloom in her chest. Morning came early. Amelia woke to the sound of Jackson moving around in the main room, stoking up the fire in the stove. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through her window. She rose quickly, splashed water on her face from the basin Jackson must have left for her, and dressed in her work clothes. The new blue dress she carefully folded and put away. That was for Sundays or special occasions. For ranch work, her old patched dress would do fine. When she emerged from the bedroom, Jackson was already dressed and making coffee. He glanced up at her entrance, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. "Didn't expect you up this early," he said. "I told you I would be." Amelia crossed to the stove. "What can I do to help?" "You can make breakfast if you want," Jackson said. "There's eggs from the chickens and bacon in the cold box. I'll go start feeding the horses." He disappeared outside and Amelia set to work. It felt good to have a task, to be useful. She found the eggs and bacon easily enough, along with some slightly stale bread that could be toasted. By the time Jackson came back inside, stamping dust off his boots, she had everything ready and on the table. They ate quickly, efficiently, like two people who had hard work ahead and no time to waste. But it was comfortable too. Amelia found she did not feel the need to fill the silence with chatter, and neither did Jackson. They were simply two people sharing a meal before a long day. After breakfast, Jackson led her outside to show her the ranch properly in the growing light. The barn was well built and organized, with stalls for 6 horses, though only 3 were currently occupied. Jackson's bay gelding, whom he introduced as Storm, her chestnut mare whom he suggested she name herself, and a sturdy gray work horse named Smoke who pulled the wagon and plow. "You should name your mare," Jackson said as they stood by the stall. The little chestnut nuzzled at Amelia's hand, clearly hoping for treats. Amelia thought about it, running her hand down the mare's soft nose. "Sage," she said finally. "For the color of the brush in the hills." "Sage," Jackson repeated and nodded. "Good name." They moved on to check the cattle. Jackson's small herd was scattered across the meadow, grazing peacefully in the morning cool. He pointed out the different animals as they rode through them on horseback, explaining which cows were his best breeders, which calves were new this spring, which old bull kept everyone in line. "I'd like to build the herd up over the next few years," he said. "Get to maybe 60 or 70 head. That's about what this land can support without overgrazing. We can sell off steers every year for income, keep the best heifers for breeding." "That's a solid plan," Amelia said. She had learned about cattle management from her father. "Do you have problems with predators?" "Some. Mountain lions occasionally, and coyotes will go after the calves if they get a chance. That's part of why I needed help. One person can't watch the whole herd all the time." They spent the morning riding the fence lines, checking for damage. In the northern section, they found where several posts had been knocked down, the wire sagging uselessly. Jackson dismounted to examine the damage. "Bear, most likely," he said, pointing to claw marks on one of the posts. "They use the posts as scratching posts sometimes and don't realize their own strength. We'll need to replace these posts completely and reinforce them." They worked together through the heat of the day, digging out the damaged posts and setting new ones. It was hard physical labor, the kind that left your muscles aching and your hands blistered even through gloves. But Amelia did not complain. She matched Jackson's pace, lifting when he lifted, hammering when he hammered. By mid-afternoon, the fence was repaired and stronger than before. Jackson straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "You weren't lying about being able to work," he said. "Most women I know would have given up hours ago. Most women you know probably haven't had to work as hard as I have just to survive," Amelia said. She did not mean it bitterly, just as fact. Fair point. Jackson looked at her with something like respect in his eyes. "Come on, let's head back to the house. We can work on planning out the garden before dinner." The afternoon was spent in the shade of the porch, with paper and pencil sketching out where different vegetables should go. Jackson admitted he knew almost nothing about gardening. His mother had handled that when he was growing up, and after coming to Arizona, he and his brother had been too focused on the cattle to do much more than plant a few token rows of beans. Amelia, however, had helped her mother with their farm garden for years. She knew what would grow well in this climate, what needed shade and what needed sun, what could be planted together and what should be kept separate. They planned out rows of tomatoes, squash, beans, corn, peppers, and carrots. Jackson had seeds stored away that his brother had bought but never planted. They would start tomorrow, preparing the soil. Over the following days they fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, quick breakfast, then out to work. Some days they focused on the cattle, moving them to fresh grazing areas or checking for illness or injury. Other days they worked on the garden, turning soil and planting seeds in careful rows. Still other days were spent on the endless maintenance that a ranch required. Fixing the barn roof, reinforcing the chicken coop against foxes, chopping wood for the stove. They worked side by side through it all. Jackson never ordered Amelia to do anything. Instead, he would say things like, "I'm planning to check the south pasture today, want to come along?" Or, "I need to move some hay bales in the barn, could use an extra pair of hands." He asked, not demanded. And Amelia found herself saying yes every time, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. because she was genuinely interested in learning every aspect of how the ranch operated. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set behind the hills. Jackson would tell her stories about growing up in Missouri, about the older brother he had loved and lost. Amelia would share memories of her parents, of the Texas farm that felt like a lifetime ago. They talked about everything and nothing, and Amelia felt herself slowly relaxing around him, letting down the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. She tried not to notice how her pulse quickened when Jackson stood close to her, reaching past her to grab a tool or explain something about the cattle. She tried not to think about how his laugh sounded when she said something that amused him, warm and genuine. She definitely tried not to think about how handsome he looked in the morning light with his hair mussed from sleep, and his shirt not yet buttoned all the way. But it was getting harder to ignore. Somewhere in the past few weeks, the careful professional distance she had been maintaining had started to crumble. She caught herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the efficient way he moved through tasks, the gentleness he showed with the animals, the patience he had when teaching her something new. And sometimes, she thought maybe he was watching her too. She would turn and find his eyes on her, thoughtful and warm. He would look away quickly, but not before she saw something in his expression that made her heart race. It was dangerous territory. She was contracted to him, dependent on him for everything. Any feelings beyond professional partnership could make everything impossibly complicated. But Amelia was learning that the heart did not care about complications. 6 weeks after she arrived at the ranch, everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday morning. They were working in the garden, weeding the rows of vegetables that were finally starting to sprout. The day was already hot, and Amelia had tied her hair up off her neck to catch whatever breeze might wander through. She was focused on carefully removing weeds from around the delicate tomato seedlings when she heard Jackson swear softly. She looked up to find him staring toward the road that led to the ranch. A cloud of dust was rising in the distance, and as she watched, she could make out riders approaching. 3 of them moving fast. "Get to the house," Jackson said quietly. His hand had moved to the gun at his hip, a gesture so automatic he probably did not even realize he had done it. "Get inside and lock the door." "What's wrong?" Amelia asked, but she was already standing, her own instincts screaming danger. "I don't know yet, but people don't usually ride up here that fast unless there's trouble. Go, now." Amelia ran for the house, Rufus barking and running alongside her. She burst through the door, slammed it shut, and threw the bolt. Then she moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain just enough to see out. The 3 riders had reached the yard. They pulled up their horses in a cloud of dust, and Amelia's blood ran cold as she recognized one of them. Frank Jenkins, the saloon owner from Apache Junction who had bid on her contract at the auction. He was a heavy-set man with a cruel face and a reputation for violence. The 2 men with him were strangers, but they had the look of hired guns, all cold eyes and easy familiarity with the weapons they wore. Jackson had positioned himself between the riders and the house, standing easy but alert. "Jenkins," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "What brings you all the way out here?" "You know what brings me, Cole," Jenkins said. He had a voice like gravel, rough and unpleasant. "You got something that should have been mine." "I don't have anything of yours," Jackson said calmly. "Everything on this ranch belongs to me, legally purchased and paid for." "That girl," Jenkins spat. "I was bidding on her contract fair and square. You came in with your fancy gold coins and stole her right out from under me. I bid higher than you. That's how auctions work. And even if it wasn't, her contract is legal and binding. She works for me now. "I'll buy the contract from you," Jenkins said. "I'll give you what you paid plus another 200 on top. That's a profit for doing nothing." "No," Jackson said simply. Jenkins's face darkened. "Don't be stupid, boy. I'm being generous here. Take the money." I said no. "Now get off my land." One of the hired guns moved his hand toward his gun, but Jackson was faster. His own gun was out and aimed before the man's fingers even touched his holster. "Don't," Jackson said softly. "I'm a fair hand with this gun, and at this distance, I won't miss. Now I'm going to say this one more time, nice and clear. Amelia Tucker's contract belongs to me, and it's not for sale at any price. She stays here. You three are going to turn those horses around and ride back to Apache Junction, and you're not going to come back. If you do, I'll consider it trespassing and defend my property accordingly." We clear. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Amelia held her breath, her hand pressed against her chest like she could slow her racing heart by force of will. Through the window, she could see the tension in Jackson's shoulders, the absolute steadiness of his gun hand. Finally, Jenkins spat into the dirt. "You're making a mistake, Cole. A big one. I don't forget when people cross me. That's your problem, not mine. Now ride out." Jenkins yanked his horse's head around viciously, making the animal squeal. The three men rode back down the road at a gallop, leaving another cloud of dust hanging in the air. Jackson stood motionless until they were completely out of sight, then finally lowered his gun. His shoulders sagged slightly. He turned toward the house, and Amelia could see the tension in every line of his body. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. "Is he going to come back?" "I don't know," Jackson said honestly. He holstered his gun but kept his hand near it. Men like Jenkins don't like being told no, and he's got enough money to hire more guns if he wants to make trouble. "This is my fault," Amelia said, guilt rising in her throat. "You're in danger because of me." "Hey." Jackson crossed to the porch in 3 long strides and looked up at her seriously. "This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. Jenkins is a bully and a criminal, and if he comes back, we'll deal with it. But you are not to blame for any of this. You understand me?" Amelia nodded, but she felt sick. She had brought trouble to this peaceful place, to this good man who had shown her nothing but kindness. "What do we do now?" "Now we stay alert," Jackson said. "We keep weapons close, we don't go anywhere alone, and we trust our instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." He paused, then added more softly, "And we don't let fear run our lives. This is our home. We're not giving it up. Our home." Amelia felt those words sink into her chest and take root. When had she started thinking of this place as home? When had she started thinking of herself and Jackson as an hour instead of a him and me? But she did not have time to examine those thoughts, because Jackson was already moving, checking the perimeter, making sure all the animals were secure and close to the buildings. Amelia helped, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for dust clouds or movement. That night, Jackson pushed his bedroll against the door and kept his rifle within arm's reach. Amelia barely slept, starting at every sound. The creak of wood settling, the rustle of wind through the trees, the distant cry of a coyote. Each one made her heart race, certain that Jenkins and his men were returning. But dawn came without incident, and then another day, and then another. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be with the constant underlying tension. Jackson taught Amelia to shoot better, spending an hour each evening having her practice with both rifle and pistol. She had known the basics before, but he taught her accuracy, speed, how to keep calm when her heart was racing. "I don't want to scare you," he said one evening as they stood by the targets he had set up near the barn. "But I need to know you can defend yourself if something happens when I'm not there. Can you do that? Can you shoot to protect yourself if you have to?" Amelia thought about the auction block, about Mrs. Henshaw's debts and the judge's cold eyes and Jenkins's cruel face. She thought about how close she had come to a life that would have destroyed her. And she thought about this ranch, this place that had become home, and the man standing beside her who had given her a chance at something better. "Yes," she said firmly. "If I have to, I can." 2 months passed without Jenkins returning. The garden flourished under Amelia's careful tending, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The cattle grew fat on the summer grass. Jackson bought 6 more cows at auction in a neighboring town, expanding the herd carefully. The ranch was thriving. And so, Amelia was beginning to realize, was she? She had gained weight, filling out the hollow places that hunger and stress had carved into her frame. Her skin had tanned from hours in the sun, and her hands had developed new calluses from hard work. But more than the physical changes, she felt different inside. Stronger, more confident, like she was becoming who she was always meant to be. Part of that was the work. She loved the ranch, loved the daily rhythm of tending animals and growing things, loved the satisfaction of watching something thrive under her care. But if she was honest with herself, a larger part was Jackson. They had grown close over the months, bound together by shared labor and shared purpose. But somewhere along the way, friendship had started to shift into something deeper. She saw it in the way he looked at her sometimes, his blue eyes soft and warm. She felt it in the way he found excuses to stand close to her, their shoulders brushing as they worked. She heard it in his voice when he said her name, like it was something precious, and she knew he must see the same things in her. The way she laughed more at his jokes than they probably deserved. The way she had started taking extra care with her appearance, wearing the pretty blue dress on Sundays even though they did not go to town. The way she looked for him first thing every morning, her day not truly started until she saw his face. They were falling in love, slowly and carefully, like two people who both knew how much was at risk. And neither of them had acknowledged it out loud, as if speaking it would somehow make it too real, too dangerous. That changed on a hot August evening when the sun was setting in brilliant streaks of orange and purple. They were sitting on the porch after dinner as usual, but tonight there was a restless energy in the air. A storm was building over the mountains, lightning flickering in the distance, the wind picking up and carrying the scent of rain. "We need the rain," Jackson said, watching the approaching storm. "The creek's running lower than I'd like for this time of year." "Will the garden be all right in a storm?" Amelia asked. "Should be. We staked everything well." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Amelia, can I ask you something?" Something in his tone made her turn to look at him fully. "Of course. Are you happy here?" The question was simple, but she could hear the weight behind it, the importance. "Yes," Amelia said honestly. "Happier than I've been in years, maybe happier than I've ever been." Jackson nodded slowly. "Good, that's good, because I need you to know that you're not just a hired hand to me. You're not just someone working off a contract. You're my partner in all this, my friend. And if you ever wanted to leave, if you ever felt like you needed to go somewhere else, I wouldn't hold you to that contract. You'd be free to go." Amelia's heart clenched. "You would let me go, just like that?" "Just like that," Jackson said. "I didn't bring you here to trap you. I brought you here because it was the right thing to do. And if staying here isn't what you want, then letting you go would be the right thing too." "Jackson," Amelia said softly. She turned on the bench to face him fully. "I don't want to go anywhere. This ranch, this life we're building, it's everything I want. You're everything I want." The words hung in the air between them. Jackson's eyes went wide, and she saw hope and fear chase across his face. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough, "you should know that I care about you. More than I should, probably, considering you work for me and live under my roof. I've been trying not to say anything because I didn't want to make things complicated or uncomfortable. But if you're saying what I think you're saying, then I need you to know that I've been falling in love with you since about the second week you were here. Maybe even since I first saw you on that auction platform, standing so brave and fierce. Joy burst through Amelia's chest like sunshine. I'm falling in love with you too, she said. I've been trying not to because it seemed so impossible, but I can't help it. You're the best man I've ever known, Jackson Cole. Jackson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, his hand cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing across her skin. Can I kiss you? Yes, Amelia whispered. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, soft and careful, like she was something infinitely precious. Amelia's eyes fluttered closed, and she kissed him back, pouring all her hope and happiness into that single perfect moment. His arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she felt safe and wanted and home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you properly, take you to town dances and buy you pretty things and make everyone know that you're my girl. And then, when enough time has passed that we're both sure, I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I'll have you, Amelia said, laughing through tears of happiness. Jackson, of course I'll have you. They kissed again, deeper this time, and the storm finally broke overhead. Rain began to pour down in sheets, drumming on the porch roof, and lightning split the sky. But inside the circle of Jackson's arms, Amelia felt only warmth and joy and absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the world washed clean by the storm. Amelia woke in her small bedroom and lay still for a moment, remembering the night before. The kisses on the porch, the soft words spoken, the promises made. It had not been a dream. It was real. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Jackson already up making coffee. When he saw her, his whole face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. Morning, he said, and crossed to her to press a kiss to her forehead, easy and natural as if they had been doing this for years. Morning, Amelia said, smiling up at him. Sleep well. Better than I have in months, Jackson admitted. Feels like I can finally breathe properly now that everything's out in the open. They made breakfast together, moving around each other in the small kitchen space with new awareness, stealing kisses between stirring eggs and pouring coffee. It was different now, Amelia thought. The same activities they had done every morning for months, but colored with new meaning, new possibility. After breakfast, Jackson surprised her by saying he wanted to go into Apache Junction. I need to talk to the judge who handled your contract, he said. Get things properly sorted. Sorted how? Amelia asked, confused. I want to void your contract, Jackson said. If we're courting with the intention of marriage, I don't want you here because some piece of paper says you have to be. I want you here because you choose to be. Amelia felt her throat tighten with emotion. You would do that, even though you paid everything you had. I'd do that and more, Jackson said firmly. Money can be earned again, but I need you to know you're free, really free, not contracted, not obligated, not owing me anything. Just here because you want to be. They rode to Apache Junction together, side by side in the bright morning. When they reached town, Jackson went directly to the judge's office, a small building near the courthouse. Judge Walton was an older man with white hair and shrewd eyes. He looked surprised to see Jackson. Mr. Cole, he said, what brings you to town? I want to void Amelia Tucker's labor contract, Jackson said without preamble. The judge's eyebrows rose. That's unusual. Most people don't void contracts they've paid for. Is she not working out? She's working out fine, Jackson said. Better than fine, but I want her free of any legal obligation to me. Judge Walton looked at Amelia, who had been standing quietly beside Jackson. Miss Tucker, are you requesting to void this contract, if it's possible? Yes, sir, Amelia said. Is Mr. Cole mistreating you? Because if so, there are other remedies we can pursue. No, Amelia said quickly. He's been nothing but kind and respectful. I just want to stay on the ranch because I choose to, not because I have to. The judge looked between them and slowly a knowing smile crossed his face. I see. Well, this is highly irregular but not illegal. Mr. Cole, you understand that you won't get your money back. The debts were paid, that can't be undone. I understand, Jackson said. I don't want the money back. I just want the contract voided. Very well. Judge Walton pulled out a form and began filling it out. I'll need both your signatures and 2 witnesses. Let me call in my clerk and secretary. The paperwork was completed quickly. Amelia signed her name one final time, and with that, the contract that had bound her to Jackson was dissolved. She was free. As they left the judge's office, Amelia felt lighter, like a weight she had not fully realized she was carrying had been lifted. Jackson took her hand as they walked down the street, and she laced her fingers through his. What now? She asked. Now, Jackson said, I take you to the general store and buy you something pretty. And then we tell the whole damn town that I'm courting you proper, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me. True to his word, Jackson bought her a beautiful green dress from the general store, along with a matching ribbon for her hair. Then he walked with her down the main street of Apache Junction, holding her hand openly, introducing her to everyone they passed as his girl. If anyone thought anything odd about the situation, they kept it to themselves. Jackson Cole had a reputation as an honest, hard-working man, and most people seemed happy for them. They were just preparing to leave town when trouble found them one last time. Frank Jenkins emerged from his saloon as they were untying their horses, and this time he had 4 men with him instead of 2. Heard you were in town, Cole, Jenkins said, his voice carrying that familiar, ugly tone. Heard you voided that girl's contract. That means she's free again. Which means I can make my own offer for her services. Walk away, Jenkins, Jackson said quietly. His hand had moved to his gun again, that same automatic gesture. I'm just talking business, Jenkins said with a nasty grin. Miss Tucker, I'll pay you good wages to come work at my saloon. Better than whatever Cole's been giving you. No, thank you, Amelia said clearly. I'm not interested. You sure about that? Because I pay real well for pretty girls who know how to be friendly with the customers. The implication was clear and disgusting. Amelia felt Jackson go tense beside her, like a bowstring drawn too tight. That's the last time you speak to her like that, Jackson said. His voice was low and dangerous. In fact, that's the last time you speak to her at all. We're leaving now, and you're going to let us leave. Because if you don't, this ends badly for you. You threatening me, boy? Jenkins took a step forward, and his hired guns moved with him. I'm making you a promise, Jackson said. You touch her, you threaten her, you even look at her wrong, and I will make you regret the day you were born. I've got friends in this territory too, Jenkins. The sheriff in the next county is my cousin. The federal marshal who rides this circuit went to school with my father. You want to start a war, I'll finish it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jenkins's face. He clearly had not known about Jackson's connections. Around them, a crowd was gathering, watching the confrontation with interest. And in that crowd were respectable townspeople, business owners, families who did not appreciate a saloon owner threatening a young woman in broad daylight. This isn't over, Jenkins said finally, but it sounded more like bluster than threat. Yes, it is, Jackson said flatly. You lost. Accept it and move on. He helped Amelia mount Sage, then mounted Storm himself. They rode out of Apache Junction at a calm, measured pace, refusing to look like they were fleeing. But once they were out of sight of town, Jackson urged the horses into a gallop, and they raced back toward the ranch as if pursued by demons. When they finally reached home, both breathing hard, Jackson pulled Amelia into a fierce embrace. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm sorry you had to hear that, had to deal with him again." "It's all right," Amelia said, though her heart was still racing. "You protected me. You stood up for me. That's what matters." "I meant what I said to him," Jackson said, pulling back to look at her seriously. "If he comes after you, if anyone tries to hurt you, I'll end them. You're mine to protect now, mine to cherish, and I take that seriously." "I know you do," Amelia said softly. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. "That's why I love you." Over the following weeks, life settled into a new pattern. They were openly courting now, which meant little changed in their daily routine, but everything felt different. Jackson would steal kisses while they worked, would hold her hand at dinner, would sit close beside her on the porch in the evenings. They talked about their future, about what they would do when they married, about how they would build the ranch together. Jackson wanted to wait a full year before proposing officially. "I want everyone to know this is real," he said. "I don't want anyone thinking I took advantage of you or rushed you into anything. A year of proper courtship, and then I'll ask your father's permission." "My father's dead," Amelia reminded him gently. "Then I'll ask the sky and the mountains and God himself," Jackson said. "And then I'll ask you, and hopefully you'll say yes." "I'll say yes," Amelia promised. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 months into their courtship, in November, when the air was starting to turn cold and the leaves on the cottonwoods had turned gold, Jackson fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious. But within days it had progressed to a fever, then to breathing difficulties. Amelia nursed him desperately, doing everything she knew to do. She made him teas from herbs she had planted, kept cool cloths on his forehead, tried to get him to eat and drink. But the fever would not break, and Jackson grew weaker each day. On the 4th day, she finally admitted she needed help. She rode Sage into Apache Junction at a gallop, found the doctor, and begged him to come. Dr. Harrison was an older man who had seen everything the frontier could throw at him. He rode back with Amelia immediately. His diagnosis was pneumonia. "It's bad," he told Amelia honestly after examining Jackson. "His lungs are filling with fluid. He's young and strong, which works in his favor, but this is serious. He needs constant care, and even then, there are no guarantees." "Tell me what to do," Amelia said. "I'll do anything." Dr. Harrison left her with medicines and instructions, and Amelia threw herself into following them with single-minded determination. She barely slept, sitting up with Jackson through the long nights, trying to keep his fever down, helping him breathe through the congestion. She prayed more in those days than she had in her entire life, bargaining with God, the universe, anyone who might be listening. "Please don't take him from me. Please let him live. I'll do anything, give anything, just let him live." On the 7th day, the fever finally broke. Jackson woke clear-headed for the first time in days, his blue eyes focusing on her face. "Amelia, I'm here," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm right here." "Thought I heard you," Jackson said, his voice hoarse and weak but his. "Thought I heard you talking to me, telling me to fight." "I was," Amelia said. "And you did. You fought and you won." Jackson's recovery was slow. It took weeks before he could get out of bed without help, longer before he could do any real work. Amelia took over running the ranch entirely during this time, doing both their jobs. She fed the cattle, repaired fences, chopped wood, and hauled water. She fell into bed exhausted every night, then woke before dawn to do it all again. But she did not complain. She had almost lost Jackson, had almost had this life they were building ripped away. A little extra work was nothing compared to that. By December, Jackson was mostly recovered, though still weaker than before. They were sitting by the fire one evening, Amelia reading aloud from a book while Jackson listened with his eyes closed when he suddenly spoke. "Marry me." Amelia stopped reading mid-sentence. "What?" Jackson opened his eyes and looked at her. "Marry me, Amelia. I know I said I wanted to wait a year, but lying in that bed thinking I might die, all I could think about was how stupid I was being. I love you. You love me. We want to spend our lives together. Why wait? Are you sure?" Amelia asked. "You're not just asking because you were sick. I'm asking because I want you to be my wife. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Because I want to build this ranch with you as my partner in every way." He reached out and took her hand. "So, what do you say? Will you marry me?" Amelia set the book aside and moved to kneel in front of his chair, taking both his hands in hers. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Yes." Jackson pulled her up and into his lap, kissing her deeply. "How about Christmas?" He said when they finally broke apart. "We could get married on Christmas Day. Start the new year as husband and wife." "That's only 3 weeks away," Amelia said, but she was smiling. "Then we better get planning," Jackson said. They were married on Christmas Day, 1883, in the small church in Apache Junction. Dr. Harrison stood up as Jackson's best man, and the doctor's wife stood up for Amelia. The church was half full of townspeople who had come to witness the union, people who had grown to respect the young rancher and his hard-working girl. Amelia wore her green dress, the one Jackson had bought her months ago, with winter wildflowers in her hair that Jackson had ridden out to find that morning. Jackson wore his best clothes, still a bit loose on him from the weight he had lost during his illness, but standing tall and proud. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. When the preacher asked if Jackson would take Amelia as his wife, his "I will" rang out clear and strong, and when Amelia promised to love and honor him all the days of her life, she meant every word with her whole heart. They rode back to the ranch as the winter sun set, husband and wife. That night, they made love for the first time in the big bed that had been Jackson's brother's and was now theirs, learning each other with tenderness and passion, cementing the bond between them. The years that followed were good ones, the kind that build slowly into a lifetime of happiness. The ranch grew and prospered under their joint management. They expanded the herd, built a new barn, added rooms onto the house as it became necessary. Jackson taught Amelia everything he knew about ranching, and she taught him patience and planning, the skills she had learned from a childhood on a farm. Their first child, a son they named James after Jackson's brother, was born in October of 1884. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Amelia discovered that she loved being a mother almost as much as she loved being a rancher's wife. Jackson was a devoted father, spending hours with little James even after long days of work, teaching him about horses and cattle as soon as the boy could walk. A daughter followed 2 years later, whom they named Sarah. She had Amelia's dark blonde hair and a fierce independence that made them both laugh. Then another son, Thomas, and another daughter, Emily. 4 children in 8 years, and the house that had once felt too big for 2 people was suddenly filled with noise and laughter and life. Through it all, Jackson and Amelia's love only grew deeper. They still worked side by side every day, partners in everything. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when they could steal a moment, watching the sun set behind the hills. They still talked about everything and nothing, and they still kissed like newlyweds even after years of marriage. Frank Jenkins tried to cause trouble one more time, about 5 years after their marriage. He showed up at the ranch with his hired guns, drunk and mean, and convinced he had some claim to Amelia. But Jackson's reputation had grown in those years. He had friends among the ranchers in the area, among the law enforcement, among the business owners in every town within 100 miles. When Jenkins and his men arrived, they found not just Jackson waiting for them, but 6 other ranchers who had ridden over when word spread of potential trouble. Jenkins was arrested that day for attempted extortion and assault. He served 2 years in territorial prison, and when he was released, he left Arizona entirely. They never saw him again. The children grew up strong and capable, learning the ranch work from the time they could walk. James took to it naturally, showing the same feel for cattle and horses that his father had. Sarah preferred the garden and the chickens, but she could ride as well as any of them when needed. Thomas was the quiet one, always reading when he should have been working, but smart as a whip. And Emily was fearless, climbing to the top of the barn before she was 7 years old and giving both her parents heart attacks. When James turned 18 in 1902, Jackson and Amelia sat him down for a serious talk. "This ranch will be yours someday," Jackson said. "Yours and your siblings. We've built it for you, all of you. But first, your mother and I want you to go see something of the world. Go to school if you want, or travel, or work somewhere else for a while. Learn what's out there beyond these hills. Then come back and decide if this is really what you want." James did go away for 2 years, worked on ranches in Montana and Wyoming, saw big cities and small towns. But in the end, he came home. "This is where I belong," he told his parents. "This land, this life, it's in my blood." The same conversation happened with each child as they came of age. Sarah went to school in Phoenix and became a teacher, but she came back to the ranch every summer and eventually married a neighboring rancher's son and settled 5 miles away. Thomas went to college in California and became a lawyer, but he never lost his love for the ranch and visited often. Emily married young to a cowboy who worked for them, and they built a house on the far end of the property, expanding the ranch into a true family operation. As the years passed, and Jackson and Amelia grew older, they gradually handed over more of the daily operations to their children. But they never stopped working entirely. Jackson was still checking on cattle in his 60s, and Amelia was still tending her garden in her 70s. They had built this place together, and they would care for it together until their last days. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Amelia by taking her back to Apache Junction, to the exact spot where the auction had taken place. The town had grown and changed. That corner of the main street was now home to a bank, and few people remembered what had once happened there. "I stood right here," Jackson said, pointing to a spot on the sidewalk. "And I saw you up there, so brave and beautiful, and I knew I had to save you." "You did save me," Amelia said, taking his hand. Their fingers were older now, marked by age and work, but they still fit together perfectly. "You saved me, and then you gave me a life beyond anything I ever dreamed of." "We gave each other a life," Jackson corrected. "I was just existing before you came. You made everything mean something." They stood there for a while, remembering that day so long ago, marveling at how far they had come. Then they went to the church where they had married and renewed their vows, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, promising once again to love each other for all their remaining days. Jackson died in 1925 at the age of 67, peacefully in his sleep after a long life well lived. Amelia held his hand as he passed, whispering that she loved him, that she would see him again someday, that he had made her happier than any woman had a right to be. She stayed on the ranch for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still working her garden every spring, still sitting on the porch every evening watching the sunset. She told stories about Jackson to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, making sure the younger generations knew what kind of man he had been. When Amelia died in 1933 at the age of 70, she was buried next to Jackson on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of a cottonwood tree they had planted together on their first anniversary. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription that James had chosen: partners in all things. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through their children and their children's children. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original log structure remained at its heart. The creek still ran clear and cold, and the cottonwood trees still shaded the banks. The land that Jackson and Amelia had worked so hard to build still fed cattle and grew crops, still gave life and purpose to those who called it home. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting behind the hills, family members swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, side by side, watching the day end together as they always had. The orphan girl who had been sold at auction, and the cowboy who had paid everything he had to save her, bound together by love and work and the land they had tamed together, eternal partners in all things. Their story became legend in that part of Arizona, passed down through the generations as an example of what true love and partnership looked like. And every person who heard the tale came away with the same understanding, that Jackson Cole had not bought Amelia Tucker at that auction so long ago. Instead, they had both found something far more valuable than money or contracts or ownership. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found home.